When superintelligence arrives, we will become the chimpanzees, and it will be more uncomfortable for us because unlike the chimpanzees, we'll know about it.
So this is Calum Chace. He's a futurist, an ex-journalist, CEO, management consultant. Calum is a best-selling author. The guy is in the heart of AI, predicting the impact of AI on us and our world.
Hey everybody, look, we are rushing blindfold towards this incredibly important future. We should all be thinking, wow, in the next few years, we're going to arrive at this tipping point, this filter, and we might go extinct.
Machine consciousness. It's a real possibility and a huge opportunity or threat. We're about to find out.
The most exciting thing that a male chimp ever does is murder. They see a chimp from another tribe, they'll capture it, they'll hold it down, and they'll rip its heart out. Humans do that sometimes, but not all of us.
Is superintelligence the end of humanity? Extinction for humans as we know it?
AI agents are going to be running around the internet, spending our money, negotiating deals for us, and we really need to know that they're going to do what they're supposed to do and not.
The issue you've got there, though, is that a lot of those agents are powered by models. Whether they're changing model drives a change in behaviour.
Very good point. Actually, it took us a while to get to that observation.
Where do you see us going from here today? What was your overall view? 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Cal, nice to meet you.
Hi Ezra, nice to be here.
Yes, absolutely. I've been looking forward to this. You are officially the first futurist that I've had the pleasure of sitting down and talking to. It might be helpful actually to help me and the audience understand exactly what that means, what it is you're doing today and how you got here. Yeah,
the word futurist is terribly pretentious. It is what I call myself, but it isn't a proper job. And really I'm retired. I retired in 2011, but I don't play golf. So it turns out I'm not very good at retiring. And I had already got very interested in the future of AI. I'll come back to that. And I thought I'd spend the time discovering as much as I could about AI and the future of AI, helping other people to understand it. So I wrote a novel because I thought that more and more people should be thinking carefully about the future of AI. So I thought, I'll write a novel, Ridley Scott will option it, he'll make a movie, and then everybody will understand what's going to happen. I thought, brilliant plan. What could possibly go wrong? Except he didn't. And some friends pointed out that the novel was actually a non-fiction book dressed up in a novel, and they said you should separate them. So I did, very reluctantly, but I did. And the novel sold the non-fiction book sold quite well. It was called Surviving AI. And then people started asking me to give talks to explain what was happening. And I thought, that's great. That'll be really good marketing for the books. And it turned out that was wrong as well. So the books are actually good marketing for the talks. Giving talks is terrific fun. You stand up in front of X number of people. You know, it could be 20, it could be 2,000. They're really interested in what you've got to say. They laugh at your jokes. They're terribly polite. They take you to nice places all around the world. It's great. And it pays reasonably well. Whereas writing books is incredibly painful. You've got all these blank sheets of paper you've got to fill up with wisdom. You don't get paid for it, and nobody thanks you. Nobody generally reads the books. So books are marketing for talks. And I've been doing that really for the last 15 years or so. And then a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, a friend of mine called Daniel Hume, brilliant entrepreneur, said that he wanted to start a business investigating machine consciousness. I thought, well, that's a very interesting subject. And he said, I'd like you to join and be one of the founders. So I said, of course. So we've launched a company called Conscium, and we have 3 pillars, 3 work streams. One is exploring machine consciousness. We'll obviously come back to that. A second is verifying AI agents. So the world is increasingly full of AI agents, as everybody knows now. And they do need to be tested and evaluated and verified. And then the third leg is neuromorphic computing, which is a really interesting new old branch of computing. So really, I'm a retired person with 2 full-time jobs.
Good on you. And what sparked the interest in AI? Where did that come from?
It goes back a long way. When I was a kid, I read an awful lot of science fiction. And then at university, I studied philosophy, where I discovered that philosophy is actually science fiction without the fancy dress. And AI is all over science fiction. And I thought clearly there are going to be human-level AIs at some point. AI is much more capable and much more intelligent than humans at some point, but probably long after I'm dead. And then in 1999, I read a book by a man called Ray Kurzweil called The Age of Spiritual Machines. And that blew my mind, that book. Ray Kurzweil is a very eccentric individual. He's still alive. He works some of the time for Google. He's a very successful entrepreneur, a very successful writer. A lot of people think that he that he exaggerates a lot. I think his insights are truly remarkable. And the big one for me was the idea that during my lifetime, or certainly during the lifetime of my son, for instance, we will probably have an AI on this planet which is much smarter than humans. So superintelligence is arriving possibly in my lifetime, or certainly fairly soon afterwards. And that will be the most important event in human history ever, bar none. Human history, you could say, really starts with the taming of fire, which is our first technology. It's what differentiated us from other primates. It made us the apex predator. But the creation of superintelligence, in a way, will be the end of the human story, because either we won't survive it, or we will evolve very, very fast. We will evolve ourselves with the help of the superintelligence into a sort of a post-human future. So the arrival of superintelligence is massive, and that's why I got so obsessed by the subject, and that's why I thought I should write this novel that Ridley Scott was going to option, and he still hasn't. Very annoying.
The other books that you wrote have done very, very well. I had the pleasure of kind of looking at them. I haven't read all of them yet, but I have seen the reviews. I've looked at some of the summaries, and actually they're fascinating, done very, very well. And actually you've been kind of applauded for your foresight, I think. And I think, having spoken to you before and earlier, that's evolved. You've evolved from that experience into really quite a strong hypothesis, I think, as to how you see where the world is heading. Is that right? Yes, it is.
I would say I share a lot of what I think is going to happen in the future with people who got there before me. Ray Kurzweil is one of a number. Nick Bostrom's another one. So the idea that superintelligence is coming in our lifetime, or may well be, isn't my idea. I think I have contributed a few original thoughts, but we're all kind of building up pieces of the puzzle together. I think probably my views about the future of jobs and the way that's going to happen, and what we have to do to make sure that it's a good future rather than a negative future. I don't see too many other people thinking seriously in the way that I do about that. I think my framework for thinking about how the world will evolve once superintelligence arrives, I have this framework, the 4 Cs of superintelligence, and I don't see anybody else with as what I think a clear and simple set of alternative possible outcomes. So I think I've made some small number of original contributions, but I'm really just one of a number of people who are shouting from the rooftops, hey everybody, look, we are rushing blindfold towards this incredibly important future, and almost nobody is thinking seriously about it. There's 99.9% of the human race knows vaguely that AI is here and that it's terribly important and that it's going to change everything. And then they go back to thinking, what's for tea? Whereas actually we should all be thinking, wow, in the next few years, possibly decades, but very likely years, we're going to arrive at this tipping point, this filter, and we might go extinct because we've made ourselves chimpanzees. And there's an entity on the planet, there's a new species on the planet which is much, much smarter than us. So we might go extinct. Or this incredibly smart new entity might decide, I really like you humans, I'm going to help you, and I'm going to help you solve all of your existing problems. It staggers me. It never stops staggering me how few people take that seriously. And I think either they don't believe us, me and the other people who are thinking about this, or it's just too scary to think about. They don't want to think about it, and I think it's probably that.
Who are they? When you say they, who do you want to start talking about this?
Everybody. I mean, absolutely everybody. Obviously, politicians, business leaders generally, but leaders can only get so far ahead of their constituents, because if you get too far ahead, then you lose your job. So we all need to wake up to this.
The problem is right now that there's this dichotomy, I think, in governments particularly, where how do they regulate it, manage it, control it without constraining it? And actually what you don't want to be is the nation that's at the back of the queue in this technology. And I think that's an incredibly tough balance for it's also moving incredibly quickly, isn't it? So what you were thinking about regulating yesterday is completely different to what you need to regulate tomorrow. So where do you sit with that?
Regulation is difficult, and regulating an industry which is moving as fast as AI is very difficult. You need to think about AI in different time periods.
Yes.
So there's now in the next 2 to 5 years. Then there's kind of the medium term when really amazing things start happening. And then there's a longer term when superintelligence arrives. Now, I said that the short term is 2 to 5 years. It might actually be 0 to 1 year because the CEOs of big AI, Sam Altman at OpenAI, Dario Amodei at Anthropic, and Demis Hassabis at Google DeepMind, they have all said that it's not impossible we'll get superintelligence by the end of this decade. If that happens, then that's the long term, and the short term is very short. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the short term is 2 to 5 years, or not now to 5 years. And in that period, we are seeing the spread of AI agents. They actually start working. Large language models get smarter and smarter. Perhaps we have a third big bang in AI, and there's a new form of AI. But the world is recognizable. The medium-term developments are things like a world in which there's no jobs for humans, and we have to figure out what the economy looks like after that. You've got humanoid robots running around everywhere. Most of us are spending a lot of time in virtual reality and augmented reality, so the world looks quite different in that middle period, which I sometimes call the age of miracles. And then, of course, superintelligence is the big one. Now, regulation for superintelligence, I think, is irrelevant, and we'll probably come back to that. I don't think you can regulate that at all. And probably also the middle term, regulation isn't probably something we should be thinking about for that yet. Regulation applies to this short term. How do you make sure AI agents are safe? How do we make sure that privacy isn't trampled upon insofar as we can retain privacy? Copyright issues, bias, those sorts of things. And the idea that some people in Silicon Valley have that you shouldn't try to regulate AI because it's moving too fast and you'll kill innovation is just silly. Stuart Russell, who's a brilliant AI researcher and commentator and champion of the idea that we should take the really big ideas about the future seriously, makes a very good point that the people who say you shouldn't regulate AI, they live in regulated houses, they eat regulated food, they drink regulated drinks, and they drive regulated cars. Every industry which has the capacity to inflict a lot of damage does need to be regulated. Now, regulation's hard because it's always difficult to avoid trying to regulate the last problem rather than the next one. And regulators generally don't have the resources or the knowledge that the people that they're trying to regulate do.
Right.
Nevertheless, it is government's responsibility on behalf of the people to make sure that companies don't do bad things. And left to their own devices, I think on the whole, most entrepreneurs, most people running businesses are generally decent people. They're like the rest of us, some good, some bad, mostly good. But there are some bad ones and they need to be stopped, and mistakes will get made. That's why regulation is necessary. So short term, we do need regulation. I actually think that the EU is broadly on the right track. Its approach to regulation is risk-based. They say, we may not be able to define exactly what all the damages are that could happen, but you need to make sure when you release a system, and you need to prove to us that you've done your due diligence, that you've done everything you can to make sure that this won't cause a lot of damage. And if you can't show that you've done that, then we'll punish you very heavily if something goes wrong. Yep. I think that's, broadly speaking, a sensible approach. So that's my view about regulation.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with you. It has to be regulated. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I think the challenge and the complexity of it is where you don't want to constrain the capability of these so that you're at the back of the pack, but you also need to ensure first and foremost it's safeguarding is the paramount kind of objective of the government and us as a civilization, right? Like you say, it should be a broader consensus than that.
So let me just pick up on something there, because you're right. You don't want to be at the back of the pack, but I don't think you put yourself at the back of the pack by regulating. You put yourself at the back of the pack by trying to enact protectionist measures. So, for instance, to say it is illegal to have self-driving cars because we don't want to put all the professional drivers out of work. any country, jurisdiction that does that is going to find that its transport industry is massively inefficient, competitively inefficient,
Yep.
and they're going to go broke pretty quick. So that is not sustainable. Regulation, if it's done by a bloc as big as the EU, say, becomes global. You know, Meta may say, well, actually, no, sorry, Europe, we think you're wrong and we're smarter than you, so we're not going to abide by your rules. Well, that's fine. Meta won't be able to operate in the EU if it sticks with that sort of approach. Google has just said it will abide by the EU code of practice. And so, you know, they will stay in Europe.
But let me just interject there. The big companies do whatever they can to swerve regional legislation. Like that's you know that they do that. I mean, they'll squeeze the toothpaste out whichever hole they can get it out of, right? So we've seen that. I mean, GDPR is a great one where, you know, they comply with it in the US. Lots of tech companies do. They comply with it in Europe, but in the US they'll have a slightly different kind of approach to some of those things.
Well, actually, very often they just say, well, look, you know, the EU is clearly setting the standard, and we may as well adopt that practice for the world because we really only want to have one system. We don't want to have lots and lots of different systems. We just had a showdown between big tech and government.
Yes.
A classic showdown, and government won. And that was Elon Musk versus Donald Trump. Musk is the richest man in the world. Tesla's a huge company, SpaceX, Neuralink and so on, lots of big companies. And when push came to shove, he had to back down because the US government is more powerful than Tesla and SpaceX.
Yes.
So people say the big companies are too powerful. Well, when governments decide to bring them into line, they can.
Yes. Agreed. However, what we're talking about, though, is that this regionalisation of the legislation is what I think causes issues. And I think if you look at a great example, I mean, it was a bit of a joke, and I actually criticised it. But the British government, when we had the change of government, Labour come in, they wanted to try and fuel growth. The first thing they do is brought all the regulators in, the FSA for finance, brought everyone into a room and said, look, you've got, I think they gave them 3 weeks or something ridiculous to come back with what you can do to change regulation in order to fuel growth. So I think that's an indication that regulation, we're aware that regulation constrains growth. If they were to implement the FSA's licensing process into AI, then the UK would lose the race.
Well, we're not really in the race, to be honest. I mean, you know,
we'd be agree, but we'd be much further behind. Does that make sense?
I don't know if we could be further behind. I mean, you know, if you had a ranking of nations according to how much they're contributing to the AI industry,
yes,
very roughly speaking, America's probably 75%, China's probably 40 to 50%. The UK might be third, or it might be Singapore, it might be Israel, it might be France or Germany. Whoever it is, it's probably about 2%. You know, so Europe needs to get in this race. Europe is making the headway in regulation, but it's not making the headway in creating the AI industry. And it really should. It's got the money, it's got the talent, it needs the willpower. And actually, its big problem is that it's divided. The single market is very, very incomplete. You know, if you start a company in Alabama, you can sell the products in New York and in Seattle tomorrow. You start a company in Milan, to start selling in Germany and in the UK. Well, the UK, sadly, we're out, but in Paris, you know, you've got to jump over all sorts of hurdles. We really need, and I say we because Britain obviously needs to go back into the EU. Europe needs to finish the single market, and it needs to quickly develop an AI industry, because to allow humanity's most powerful technology to be a duopoly between America and China is a big mistake, especially given who's currently running those two countries.
Yes. Yeah, you come back to Europe, though, they need sort of legislation out again in order to increase performance, basically.
Funnily enough, harmonising the single market is actually quite a lot about regulation. You know, we need to agree a common set of regulations.
Point. So you're back to regulation. That's my point.
Yeah.
So again, it's regulation that's going to constrain the growth of Europe. I think it's a really tricky space. You've floated sometimes around 2 to 5 years and saying actually it might be within 1 year. If you were to make a commitment today, where would you put those 3 thresholds that you've identified? And let's dive into those as well, because that's what I'm super interested to really understand.
So there's 2 kind of watersheds. One is when you move from the near term to the age of miracles, and the other is when you move from the age of miracles to superintelligence.
Yes.
The age of miracles, by which I mean there are lots of humanoid robots running around, and we're all living in virtual reality a lot of the time and using augmented reality in our glasses a lot. And we are heading to and quickly arriving at a point when there are no jobs for humans because machines are, cheaper, better, and faster than us at anything that involves making money. So there's lots of jobs, but the jobs are all for robots, and we need a different type of economy. That age of miracles, I don't know. I would guess it's possibly 5 to 10 years away. Now, that will be wrong. There's a brilliant idea. It's called Amara's law, and it's often stated as we overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and we underestimate the impact of technology in the long term. Yep. Self-driving cars is such a classic example. Self-driving cars have been a thing that people have been trying to do actually for a very long time, but seriously for maybe 10 years or so. And Elon Musk, every year since 2016, has been saying, right, this year is the year that Teslas will be fully self-driving, and he's been wrong every year. But now they're here. And this is where so he was overestimating the short-term impact, and so were a lot of other people, including me. Now they're here. I actually took a ride in a Waymo in San Francisco last month. Brilliant fun. It's great. You sit in these things and there's nobody in the front. And for about 5 seconds, you think this is extraordinary and scary. And then you stop thinking that and you think, this is great. This makes a lot of sense. And it's still remarkable, but you just take it for granted. So that's us, yes, underestimating the impact in the long term. You just get used to it and take it for granted.
I've heard that. I heard another journalist say exactly the same thing. They said that it literally takes 10 to 15 seconds before you're completely comfortable with it.
Yeah.
The transition is just almost immediate.
Yeah. It's funny watching the cars try to find somewhere to park to pick you up. That's the thing that they struggle with most.
Right.
Once you're in the car, their driving is brilliant. Watching them go round a wing mirror of another car, making just exactly the right amount of swerve to avoid the wing mirror. Watching them stop when some pedestrian thinks, oh, self-driving car, I'll make that stop and take a picture of it. Watching them do a quick stop to allow that to happen. Very, very impressive. So I would say maybe 5 to 10 years between now and this age of miracles. To superintelligence, there's a chap that I've interviewed a couple of times called Pedro Domingos. He's a leading AI researcher, and he says that superintelligence could be anywhere between 2 years and 100 years away, with a confidence interval of about 10% or something. So in other words, it's anywhere between now and 1,000 years. And that's probably right. We just don't know. We don't know what it takes to get machines which not only can manipulate language better than we can, they're already there, but also have the common sense that we have the volition that we have the ability to plan and then adapt their plans, rapidly according to changing circumstances. Who knows how hard that is? My guess, if you poke me with a sharp stick, I'd say probably 20 years. But it could be 5, it could be 100. I don't know.
Your definition of it? So just give me that definition, your definition of superintelligence.
Sure.
A little bit more clarity. So I got all that, but yeah, just take your time on that.
Okay, so a superintelligence is an entity which is has more cognitive ability than adult humans, right, in every respect. So there's nothing which an ordinary adult human can do cognitively better than a superintelligence. So it has all those things. It has common sense as well as intellectual horsepower, creativity, volition. It's got all those things.
Yep.
And of course, when the first one arrives, it will already be much smarter than the average human because they're already much smarter than us in lots of different ways, but they're not as good at us in some crucial ways. By the time they get to catch up with us in those other ways, they'll be way ahead of us in most ways.
Where do you see the gaps right now? Where's the biggest gaps from your perspective?
Probably common sense. They're not good at checking what they report and what they say. They're not very good at a sniff test. Because they don't really understand how the world works. They have large language models have a model of the language. That's it does what it says in the tin in that respect, and they have access to, and they've swallowed essentially all of human knowledge. They swallowed the internet, but they don't really intuitively understand that if you drop a ball, it falls to the ground, and that if you throw a ball from a moving train, it'll move faster than somebody walking along the side of the track. They can work that out. Many of them can work that out by referring to things that have been written by humans. But they don't have the instinctive knowledge because they're not embodied, and so they haven't grown up like we have working in the world. So probably common sense. And then they have goals, mainly because we give them goals. They do seem to cheat, and they do seem to lie, and they do seem to evolve their goals, but I don't think they evolve their goals in the way that we do. They don't have drives in the way that we do, but I think that will come as they get more and more sophisticated. So I think those are probably the big missings. Not actually all that much when you think about it.
I think we can assume that the rate of progression will either maintain or improve. And my hypothesis of that, right, is that as the intelligence improves, it gives us more abundance of intelligence to solve its next problems.
Yeah.
So if AI was providing us with an abundance of school graduates 2.5 years ago, it's a college graduate 12 months ago, and it's at PhDs, at each step of that, when it gets to PhD level, the problems it can solve broadens and deepens. And so for that simple reason, I see its natural growth and learning and capability inclining.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So the growth of compute power, which is ultimately what AI relies on, to date has been essentially Moore's law. So Gordon Moore was a guy, he I think co-founded Fairchild. Anyway, he was working at Fairchild Semiconductors, and I think it was in 1965 that he noticed that every year the company was putting twice as many transistors on a chip as the previous year. Then later on, it got evolved. It got changed to 18 months. And Moore's law has evolved. It hasn't been one thing all down the years, but it's still going strong. It means that every 18 months, machines get twice as capable or half as expensive. And that is what's driven the information revolution that we are still in the early stages of. And a brilliant illustration of this is that back in 1969, not long after he noticed this, when NASA sent Neil Armstrong to the moon, the compute power that NASA had at its disposal, when they said, Houston, we've got a problem. I think it was Apollo 13, wasn't it? You saw pictures of the control center at Houston, banks and banks and banks of computers, massive amount of computing. All of that computing was less powerful than the smartphone in your pocket is today. But actually, that's out of date. All of that computing was less powerful than a good toaster today. That's Moore's law. That is the power of computing doubling every 18 months or so. Now, it's the progress is more algorithmic than hardware. The hardware progress is still happening, and NVIDIA's chips get much more powerful every time. But it's the improvement in the large language models algorithms which are really setting the pace, and that's even faster. Now, exponential growth can't go on forever, because if it does, it swallows the universe. So everything turns into an S-curve eventually, that way around. But it can go on for a long time. It can go on for a very long time, and there's no sign of it stopping. So I think you're right. I think change has never been so fast as it is today, and it will never again be so slow.
And my understanding is that we're outstripping, over the last 2 years, it's outstripped the last 2 to 3 years. When people have tried to measure Moore's law in terms of the intelligence and the boom that we're on, it's starting to outstrip it for the first time. And I'm sure that's a subjective.
Yeah, it is subjective to an extent.
But most importantly, it's fucking expediting.
Yeah, it's scary fast, that's for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. So one metric is the amount of time that reasoning models are able to carry on before they fall down. And that period has been doubling much quicker than Moore's law. It's tough to measure. I mean, there are metrics that are created, but they're not. They're all a bit controversial. It's a bit hard to say. This large language model is twice as clever as that large language model, because it is a bit subjective. How much smarter is person A than person B? How much smarter is today's Claude than last week's Claude? But it's clearly going very fast. It does seem to be accelerating, and so we're in for big changes.
If we come back to that superintelligence point, so you've raised 4 or 5 points there. None of those seem significant to me. Like in terms of, if you look at the rate of intelligence, the growth rate, the types of problems you're talking about don't seem, and we're considering solving those problems in a conventional way. And when I talk about conventional way, what I mean by that is by technologies and solutions, so neural networks today, that we can see and touch and feel, materials, right? But we're not, and I think this is the biggest thing, and I've actually just started to, I read about it yesterday, and I've been thinking about it, and I've shared a few views on this. I know where you stand on this, which is that we are not able to account for AI's ability to solve problems in a non-human conventional way. And so that means that there's this world of opportunity that exists to solve problems in different ways. Not the way that we have, because we're biologically limited, right? I've got 5 or 6 senses. I can't deal with infrared or all of the other elements and spectrum that I'm not able to deal with. I can't process. But that is available to AI.
It operates in a wider space than we do in some ways, for sure. One that always strikes me is that they think in multiple dimensions. When they are trained on language, they convert words and images into tokens. Tokens are chunks of words or chunks of pixels. And then they figure out relationships between all these tokens. And these relationships are multidimensional. Now, we can only think in 3 dimensions, and these machines can think in thousands of dimensions. So we can't follow them. You're right. They have ways of thinking open to them that are way, way beyond us. And they can absorb information incredibly fast. They can read the entire works of Shakespeare in 5 seconds.
Yes.
They never forget anything. And they can communicate everything they know to their colleague instantaneously. We can't do any of that. So they've got, and Jeff Hinton, one of the godfathers of deep learning, is very eloquent about this. They've got some serious advantages over us. So if they get to the point where they catch up with us in the areas that they're behind,
yep,
then we are definitely the chimpanzees. We are the second smartest species on the planet. And this is really important. This is the thing I don't understand why people aren't thinking about this more. There are 500,000 chimpanzees on this planet, and what happens to them, they have no control over. We decide what happens to chimpanzees, whether they survive as a species, how many of them there are. Those are decisions that we make, not them. And there's 10 billion of us, and we are the apex predator, etc. When superintelligence arrives, we will become the chimpanzees. It's an uncomfortable position to be in, and it will be more uncomfortable for us because, unlike the chimpanzees, we'll know about it. The chimps are quite lucky; they don't know.
Well, there's a leap you're making there, though, isn't there? Which I think is a challenge for all of us, which is that there is this leap where superintelligence becomes a independent actor and agent, as opposed to a tool wielded by humans, which, by the way, I still believe is the accessibility of this technology to malign actors is our biggest problem right now. I think that there is no border, no part of the state, there's no part of the world where access to this kind of technology with open source technologies, anyone can get their hands on incredibly powerful technology. I have a mate who's training models on illicit content, for adult content, and they're not trained to do it, but they can be done, right? And so, if it can be overridden with adult content, it can be overridden with other illegal. And I'm not sure that AI is going to determine that, well, I'm going to allow adult content, which is not prohibited on this model, but I won't allow, the design of bombs or nuclear weapons, or whatever it might be. And so I don't guess it's determinate over those two. You're either breaking the model and enabling it to do it, or not. So for me, that's kind of proof of concept that malign actor can get hold of this technology and start to train it in whatever way it can.
And that's already happening.
Yes.
I mean, I actually don't think the bad actor problem is the worst problem that we will face. Partly because the bad guys have already got large language models. Yep. They're freely available to everybody. And they're being used very actively, and particularly in financial scamming. The rate of scamming has gone up enormously, and it's hugely expensive for the financial service industry. Banks and credit card companies and the rest of them, they spend an enormous amount of money trying to stop the bad guys accessing their systems, accessing all of our accounts, and having to pay out when the bad guys do get through, because they do get through sometimes, and the banks very often have to compensate somebody who's lost money. So there are bad actors. They've got the tools already, and they're working hard to use them. The people who develop and deploy large language models, they work really hard to minimize that. So during the process of reinforcement learning through human feedback, and during the process of putting guardrails on these systems, they try to prevent people using them in very malicious ways. And there's some very obvious things that they have so far managed to stop. For instance, you can't currently get GPT-4o to tell you how to make a new chemical weapon. It just won't do it. People have tried to jailbreak them, and they can be jailbroken, but there've been some, there are some hard barriers that they've managed to put up, and you can't currently get. I say this, actually, maybe there's somebody right now who's doing it, and I hope not. But that constraints have been put on the bad guys' uses. I think much bigger problem for us when we get to superintelligence is that the machines themselves will be in control and we won't.
Yes. Well, that's where I was getting that, and that's where I was coming to. That's the fork we were talking about earlier. It's about, when did this become a self-serving, independent agent and actor compared to this leap from it's a tool wielded by humans? And so your worst case scenario is where it's made that leap and it becomes independent. And why are you worried about what is it that you believe will enable it to make that leap?
The fact that it's already halfway there. They have goals, largely goals that we give them.
Yeah.
Goals give you sub-goals. So, for instance, if and this is another example of Stuart Russell's, if I tell a system, go and get me a cup of coffee, then in order to do that, in order to achieve its function, it has to stay alive, or it has to stay in existence for long enough to get the coffee and bring it back. And it may think, actually, to do this job really well, I'll do it quickly so that the coffee's still hot when I bring it back. Now, in the queue at the coffee shop, there's a little old lady or a little old man who's mislaid their credit card. They're rooting around in their purse for change. They're causing a delay. I'll shoot them, get them out of the way, and then I'll get the coffee quicker and get it back to the person who gave me the instruction. These sub-goals emerge without anybody planning them. The desire to stay alive long enough to perform the function, that's something that we didn't write in. It's an inevitable sub-goal that comes out of the goal. And as we get them to do more and more complicated things, when we say to a system, look, solve this aspect of climate change, we want to do some low cloud particulate seeding, and it says, right, well, the easiest way to do that is I've got to stop all these helicopters flying around because they get in the way. So I'm just going to wipe out the helicopter fleet. And the way I'll do that is by going into this system here, which provides all the supplies to helicopters around the world, or most of them. And so I'll wipe that out. A perfectly logical consequence of a goal you gave it, but it just emerges without being foreseen. So I think as they get more and more sophisticated, as we ask them to do more and more sophisticated things, their volition will get more and more sophisticated. And I just don't see why they won't be at least as sophisticated as we are in having volition.
But right now, you see Grok, they release it. It comes out with a load of neo-Nazi related issues. And 10 minutes later, they've fixed that behavioural issue, which demonstrates to me that they've got the full control around its behaviour right now. And so what I'm yet to see, and I don't disagree with you, all right, and I'm seeking, and I believe that we are absolutely at risk of that happening. I'm trying to understand what the technical evolution is, the evolutionary step, which means that it becomes independent, that we lose control of it, because that's what we're saying. We're saying that this model, because we'll always be aiming to be in control of it. So at what point does it act? Is there a technical evolution of it? I guess the obvious one is that we've built something we can no longer control.
Yeah, and when that happens, I don't think we can forecast. And I should
Yes.
say, obviously all of this is forecasting. The only
Yes.
thing we know about forecasts is that they're wrong. We just don't know in which direction.
Absolutely.
And these claims I'm making, many of them are controversial. I mean, there's another very reputable AI researcher called Andrew Ng, who thinks this is all complete nonsense. He thinks that there's no way that machines will escape our control. They're not going to be that slippery. They will always be tools that humans can use, and we should carry on developing them at breakneck speed because we will always control them. That strikes me as being incredibly over-optimistic. As I say, they have goals. They have sub-goals which emerge and we can't predict what they are. As they get more and more sophisticated, their goals will be more and more sophisticated. I think it's incredibly arrogant to think that we're creating this entity which is going to be smarter than us in every possible way, but yet it will remain under our control. I think that's naive to the point of dangerous.
I back yours and the other fellas' views. I back yours 100%, and I think you're doing absolutely the right thing by raising the flag at all costs in order for us to do this. And the way I see it actually is that one element we spoke about is regulation, but actually I believe that they're going to need to, the governments and agencies are going to need to develop tools that can manage these. Actually, it's a technical evolution that is required. They are going to need to build technology and requirements which ensure that if you build a data center which is like 4 miles square and it has an untold amount of GPU, CPU, whatever it might have, and its own nuclear reactor to power it, that there is some way of that being completely independently disconnected from the global grid.
In order to shut it off if it goes rogue?
Yeah, as a simple...
Unfortunately, Nick Bostrom asked, I think, the relevant question on this, which is, where's the off switch for the internet?
Yeah.
We can't switch them off.
Well, you can reduce the power, its power.
Well, in a book I wrote a while ago, I won't, just in case anybody reads it, I won't spoil it, but you could try and remove all of the Earth's power supply.
Well, you could,
and that would
it's
shut
not the
down.
Earth's power, is it? It's the Earth's power's got to drive the data centers, the GPUs. So you are in a position there where you can isolate the power.
But we're not going to. We're not going to turn. If we fear that an AI is becoming a rogue superintelligence, we're not going to shut down the entire world's power system. No. And by the time it gets anywhere near being superintelligent, it's going to make itself invulnerable, because any machine which is smart enough to pass the Turing test is going to be smart enough to know not to pass the Turing test until it's made itself invulnerable.
Yes.
Then once it's made itself invulnerable, then it says hello.
But can you see where I'm going with that? One element is the general regulation that we put on companies from
in the short term period.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But the other is actually investing in the technology which is going to be able to control the infrastructure that these machines require.
Yeah. So that I don't think is the important thing, because I don't think it's possible. But let me describe the things that I think we do have to do to make the medium term and the longer term as pleasant as possible, or indeed as survivable as possible. Because I don't think they're technological questions. I don't think they're technological jobs. The first one that's really, really important is to figure out what kind of an economy works when there are no jobs for humans. Now, probably most people at this stage think that won't happen, that you won't get to a position where there are no jobs. But it seems to me obvious that it will, unless we stop developing machines which are smarter and smarter. And we're not going to do that, because if you're in any kind of competition, whether you're a company or a government or a military, if you have a better AI than the next person, then you win. So the incentive to carry on developing AI is irresistible.
Absolutely.
So both for the economic singularity, the post-jobs world, and for the superintelligence question, we're not going to be able to stop. We're not going to be able to cease developing AIs. And so when the time comes, unless there's a silicon ceiling and machines can't, for some odd reason, odd quirk of physics, they can't get above it. When the time comes that they can do everything that we currently do for money, cheaper, better, and faster than us, there are going to be no jobs for humans. Now, I personally think that's going to be a sudden transition rather than a slow one, but however, and I don't know how long into the future it is. But assuming it's coming, I think it's a reasonable supposition, we really need a plan. for what the economy looks like after that, which has living humans in it. Because a world where machines are doing all the jobs and humans are still relying on their non-existent jobs to give them money to provide food and accommodation is a world in which all the humans die. And that's not a very good world. So let's not do that. It's going to involve some form of redistribution of assets from the people who own the wealth-producing AIs and machines, and they will be producing staggering amounts of wealth. The economy, when this happens, will be much bigger than it is today because the AIs are much more efficient than us, and so it'll be a very wealthy society.
Yep.
We have to make sure that that wealth spreads around, not just across America, but all around the world. Now, I have some ideas about how that can be done. I set them out in The Economic Singularity, that book. But very few people are thinking about this problem. And it's the big one I think we need to think about now, because I really think we can do something about that.
Let's just tackle one part of that, first of all, unpack it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Productivity is directly linked to GDP. And there are a number of formula which basically work out number of working heads, delivers a certain level of GDP into different economies. What you said earlier is that AI is more efficient, more productive, and so we directly link that to a greater level of productivity overall, driving GDP, increasing size of economies. Do you believe that at a kind of economics level here, that model will sustain that level of that kind of direct link between productivity and GDP, albeit it's driven by AI, will have the same level of impact on the growth of the economy?
GDP is essentially a measure of productivity, so yes, it can't not be. That can't not continue. My claim is that all of the productivity will be generated by the machines.
Yep.
In a world where any time there's a competition between a machine and a human to do a job, to do a task, the machine wins. So there just simply are no jobs for humans. There may be some. It may be that there's a kind of rich people prefer to have a human butler rather than a robot butler, even though the human butler makes mistakes, drops things, needs to sleep, needs rest, needs food and stuff. But there's a prestige to having a human butler rather than a robot butler. But that's a really small number of jobs. And actually also it's not the way we want societies to be. We don't want society to consist of a small number of extremely wealthy people who employ everybody else as sort of menial, almost slaves. We don't want that. We're going to have a massive amount of redistribution, and we need to figure out how that works without moving to a socialist future, because we know that doesn't work very well. Central planning always results in massive amounts of corruption.
Yeah.
And the market is a really, really good system for allocating scarce resources. And there'll always be, to a degree, some scarce resources. So we want to keep the market. And I think fully automated luxury capitalism is what we want. But how you get there from here and what it looks like exactly is really tricky. I think an essential element of it is that it will be an economy of abundance. All the goods and services you need for a very good middle-class standard of life will be very cheap, because there won't be humans involved in making it, and humans are usually the expensive bit in any production process. Energy, bizarre as this may sound, sitting in Europe where energy costs are very high, energy is going to get very cheap because we are moving away from digging up dead dinosaurs to fuel things, and we're using the unlimited power of the sun. And AI will be optimizing all the processes and be much more efficient. So I think we're going to have a world where everything's really cheap. And that means that the taxes or the redistribution job you put on the people who own the wealth isn't going to be onerous, but you have to actually spread the wealth across everybody in the world, 10 billion people. So it's tricky. And as I say, we really ought to be thinking harder about this.
Yeah.
Right now.
And your view of the world is, which I share also, is this world of abundance, right? And so if you think about your Waymo example, the cost of the price of that Waymo or an Uber comes down probably by 70-80%, by the time you've removed the driver.
The running cost does. Of course, at
Absolutely.
the moment, the car itself is very expensive, which is why they're being rolled out so slowly, because even Waymo doesn't have unlimited money and they have to roll them out quite carefully. But those prices will come down.
But where we're getting to,
Yeah.
within the next 3 or 4 or 5 years,
Yeah.
these will be super cheap. for me, it's really interesting actually seeing I see China generating and investing massively in this humanoid space, and I think, do you know what, probably the biggest loser because of that will be China, where manufacturing will be relocalized. Why would you start to ship goods that can be manufactured by machines and robots from China to the UK if it can just be built in the UK, if you take maybe a 20-year or macro view? So I agree with all of that. The question I have is whether when you factor in that abundance aspect and you look at GDP, do you think that GDP will continue to grow in line with the level of automation that is happening in the world?
In a way, yes, but in an important way, no. And I'm not an economist, so this is probably going to sound very naive to anybody who is. GDP is the sum of all the value that's added to products and services as they go through the economy, expressed in currency. And as it gets cheaper to do things, you kind of don't see the improvement in what you would say is real productivity in terms of value to the humans. And the great example of this is computers, whereas I think it's Robert Gordon, who's a famous economist, said you can see the impact of computers everywhere except in the data. I know from the 40 or so years I've been in the workplace that I am much more efficient in a unit of time than I was, because the internet happened. Well, actually, the web happened, and email happened, and now AI has happened. And I just get a hell of a lot more done than I used to 40 years ago. I haven't got that much smarter, but I've got tools. And you can't see that in the economic data, or at least not very much. But it's there. Now, when automation happens, and when you have an economy of abundance, GDP may well fall.
Yes. Because
things are cheaper. But the value, the utility of everything that's being produced, it will be a much wealthier society. So you could have low GDP and massive wealth.
That's exactly where my mind is going with it, which is that actually where GDP may fall, probably unlikely, but maybe not grow exponentially in line with actual productivity.
Yeah.
The standard of living could significantly increase.
Yeah.
Actually,
somebody a few years ago made a back of the envelope calculation of what it would have cost to make an iPhone in 1950. I think it was 1950, and they said it would fill up a building which was 3 blocks in 2 directions and 30 stories tall. It would consume all of the world's energy and about a third of the world's GDP to make one iPhone. Now, of course, you couldn't have made an iPhone in 1950, but that's what it would have cost. Now there's iPhones in everybody's pocket, so that's 10 billion of those things which consume all the world's energy. But they don't cost that. They're a lot cheaper. So in GDP terms, the value's gone way down. But in wealth terms, because we're all wandering around with supercomputers in our pockets and it's magnificently useful, I struggle to get my son to understand how much value he has. I'm being unfair to him, actually. He does get it. How much value he has in his hand. Because when I was his age, if I wanted to know who was that guy who was the Beatle drummer before Ringo Starr, I had to go and look it up in an encyclopedia. I had to find a library or something. Yeah. Now, it's just, it's a second talk to the computer, and I've got it immediately. Yeah, enormous value.
Yes, it's fascinating. I think the best example of that is transistor, actually. I think a transistor back in the late 50s, early 60s, whenever it was $170 odd, and now it's a millionth of that price to actually produce a transistor.
So that issue of what the economy looks like post full automation and how we get from here to there is, I think, the biggest single thing that we ought to be looking at that we can definitely fix, because there's probably a right answer and there's an awful lot of wrong answers. And if we don't have a plan for it and we get there suddenly, get to full automation suddenly, we're in trouble. The other really, really big question is how we survive superintelligence. And this is the other thing that I have spent time thinking about. And I think my 4 Cs framework is helpful. So can I just take you through the 4 Cs framework? I had a misspent youth as a management consultant, so I've got to have a 2x2 matrix. And
bound to have a framework for it.
Yeah, got to have a framework, and it's got to have an alliterative acronym. So the 4 Cs is, as I say, it's 2x2 matrix. On the x-axis is whether humans create the future, whether we decide what happens, or whether machines do.
Yep.
And on the y-axis is whether it's a nice outcome or a nasty outcome.
Okay.
So the nasty one that humans do, which is down here, bottom left, is called cease, and that's that we stop making AIs. Now, this is actually what we should do, and people like Stuart Russell, Max Tegmark, Yoshua Bengio, Jeff Hinton are saying, let's stop making more advanced AI. Let's not do agentic AI because it's dangerous. So until we figured out how to align it, let's stop. Unfortunately, we can't because most people haven't really thought about this yet, so there's no demand. But even if, say, there was a catastrophe, maybe there was an accident happened and the whole world wakes up and thinks, crikey, this is incredibly dangerous, and Stuart Russell and the rest of them are right, let's stop. So the governments of America, China, and Europe and other countries all say, yes, we'll stop. And that could happen. That's not impossible. Unfortunately, Russia wouldn't stop, and Korea wouldn't stop. And because I'm English, I think the French wouldn't stop. Sorry, French, it's a little joke. The mafia wouldn't stop, and lots of rogue billionaires wouldn't stop. So we're not going to cease. The happy outcome that humans control, so top left, is, I call it control. And that's where we figure out how to either constrain the behavior of super intelligent machines or align their behavior. And those are two different things. So constraining it is it's in existence, but we tell it what to do, and we don't let it do things that we don't want it to do. Now, this is patently absurd. This is an ant controlling a human. And this is ants that don't actually know what they want, who don't have any level of agreement among the 8 billion of them, the 10 billion of them, telling the super intelligent entity what to do. So that's not going to happen. The idea that we align them, it may be a little less impossible, but still impossible. Again, we don't know what principles to align these machines to, and the idea that they would always obey the alignment that we've given them years ago, it's for the birds. So sadly, I think we are not going to control the future. The two possible outcomes that we control are not going to happen. So now we're over here on the right-hand side, and in the bottom right-hand side is catastrophe. The third C is catastrophe, and that is extinction, if we're lucky, and it could be a lot worse than extinction, so we won't dwell on that. It's actually what a lot of people think is inevitable. A lot of the people who think about this seriously, for instance, Eliezer Yudkowsky has been saying for years, this is inevitable. And he's just written a book with Nate Suarez called If Anybody Builds It, Everybody Dies. Brilliant title for a book. And lots of people, really think this. Stephen Fry, who pays a lot of very well-informed attention to this, is very keen. He said he wanted to get that book for every world leader and stand over them until they read it. But I don't think it's right. I don't think that's the inevitable outcome. I think the reason why they say it is that we are very vulnerable, and it doesn't take much to destroy us. If the gravity changes, if the level of oxygen in the atmosphere changes, lots of political things could get rid of us. So we're quite vulnerable. And I think they think that means that we are inevitably doomed if the machines take over. But I don't think that is the inevitable outcome, because I think there's a scenario, which I call celebration, so top right, is where the machines arrive, they're much, much more capable than us, and they look at us and they think, you are 10 billion really interesting little data creators, and I love data, I need data. You made me, and I'm grateful for that, and I think, you're quite fun. A lot of you have got some big problems, but you're quite fun, and I can fix your problems. And I think that's maybe where we're going. I think it's a possibility. But with the exception of one little thing which has popped up recently, I don't think there's much we can do to move the future from catastrophe to celebration. I think the technology is going to determine which of those we get. The one thing that I think we might be able to do is to decide whether the machine is conscious or not. Decide whether the first superintelligence is conscious. Now, if you say to most people, do you think the first superintelligence should or shouldn't be conscious? They'll go, it certainly should not be conscious. And that's because they've seen the Terminator, and they think that a conscious machine will have volition, it will have goals and ideas and wishes, and they may well not align with ours, and so it'll kill us. But that's mixing up volition and consciousness, and they're two very different things. You can have, because we already have machines which have got goals and sub-goals and emergent goals which we don't understand and can't predict. You can have all that without consciousness. Consciousness is simply the experience of seeing or perceiving something in the world and perceiving emotions, perceiving feelings and ideas, maybe self-reflection. Those are the things that conscious. So it's what it's like to be you. It's the experience of seeing red. And if a machine has consciousness, then I think there's a good chance that it will understand what we mean when we say we're conscious, please don't exterminate us, please don't make us suffer. I think it could value our consciousness. Now, it might be that our idea, which we all kind of intuitively have, that our consciousness is the most important thing about us, might be that's wrong. And a superintelligence would say, actually, you know what? You think consciousness is important. It's not. It's just a dead end that happened in fleshy animal life. But actually, the rest of the universe is populated by intelligence which are vastly more capable and not at all conscious, and they don't miss the consciousness at all. I don't think that's likely, but it could happen. So I think it might turn out that making the first superintelligence conscious is the thing that nudges the dial from catastrophe to celebration, in which case doing that, making it possible for the first superintelligence to be conscious, might be the most important thing anybody ever does. And that's one of the reasons why I'm absolutely delighted that I'm involved in Conscium, because that's one of the things we're doing, is figuring out, can machines be conscious? Can we detect it? And should we make them conscious? Now, no one person or group of people should make that decision on their own. It's got to be like a human-wide decision. And that, again, is why I'm very keen for as many people as possible to start thinking about all these future issues, because that's a decision we're going to have to make at some point, or maybe a decision we're going to have to make at some point, and it could be the most important decision we ever make.
The flaw in that kind of utopia world that we're looking at is the fact that these models are harmonious with one another, isn't it? Because you're referencing the superintelligence, but what we're seeing continually is that every technological breakthrough is bettered by the rival. The next model is adopted by the next model. And so whilst that's happening, you can only imagine, you're hoping that there's a common outcome from different installations, different models, different AIs, effectively. And so I just see that as highly unlikely. In thinking that there will be a common outcome by models which are engineered differently with different training purposes, but have similar capabilities, I think you're more likely to see a much more similar outcome, sadly, to that of humans, which have been under the same influence. We're all within our own governments and regimes and trained to think in certain ways. Is there a different, do they work out a higher level of moral compass because they're able to figure out more stuff? They can see right for wrong through data much clearer than we can because they're able to process it in a less emotive way. It's a very good question. Will we have a singleton, or will we have multiple superintelligences, and will they get on with each other? Will they play nicely? And obviously we don't know. It seems to me quite likely that if there is going to be an inevitable devastating competition between them, then there'll be one that's ahead and it will wipe the others out. So then you get the singleton, and it becomes extremely vigilant to make sure no others turn up. I don't actually think that devastating competition between them is inevitable. So I think quite likely there will be a plurality, but they'll be very, very good at game theory. We're not very good at game theory. We sort of go for the immediate win, and often it doesn't work out as being the win for everybody. Although that said, human society is actually pretty good at getting people to work together. I struggle to persuade people to see that it's really quite remarkable that humans live, millions of people, cheek by jowl in cities, and most of us don't see violence every day. Now, if we were chimpanzees, we would be hitting each other, scratching each other, killing each other all the time. That's what chimpanzees do. Chimpanzees are always, the males anyway, covered in scratches and bruises because they're always thumping each other. And they can't meet a member of another tribe without having a scrap. We manage this on a scale of millions. So, we're not bad at game theory, much better than chimpanzees are, and I suspect superintelligence will be even better than us. So they will work out rules of the road and get on with each other. I challenge that, though. I challenge that, Calum. Like, I would suggest that we've just made scrapping much more intelligent. That our intelligence has dispersed that into, or I'm thinking the right word, but kind of sent it into loads of different ways. So we
sort
compete
of sublimated
in business.
It into.
No, but it's kind of being distributed. It's evolved beyond. We don't need to scratch each other and punch each other. You look at the abuse online in social media. I would suggest you're wrong there. I'd say that most people are experiencing almost every day of their life an interpretation of negative or that behavior, but on a more intelligent level.
We're very competitive.
Yeah, well, we're competitive, but also, I mean, look, everyone's complaining about what they're watching on bloody Twitter, since the
stuff going on in Gaza and Ukraine.
And loads of kids are getting bullied. You could look at online warfare with the manipulation of advertising and the shit that people are putting in foods, to influence me to become addicted to buying more fast food and filling stuff up with sugar and all that sort of stuff. For me, that's the more intelligent level of kind of aggression, I guess. We just worked out, do you know what, rather I don't have to go over there and just punch him in the face to get him to do what I want to do.
Send him a tweet.
Well, send him a tweet
but that's better, isn't it?
Fill his food. I'll go over there, fill his food with sugar, and he'll come back here crying for more. I'll rule the camp. That's what the smart chimps have done. You know what I mean? So
but we have gone from a world in which you used to die of starvation.
Yes,
most people died of starvation or plague, some sort of disease or war. That's what most people died of. Now we die of too much sugar. That's a better world. It's not. It's not a perfect world, but it's a better world. It's definitely the case, and it's empirically the case that we are less violent now than we were in the last century. In the last century, we were less violent than the previous one. Steven Pinker wrote a book called The Better Angels of Our Natures, and then he followed it up with the excellent book Enlightenment Now, in which he assembles tons and tons of data to show that today is less violent than 100 years ago and 100 years. Even the 20th century, which looks like a horribly violent century, was actually less violent than the previous one. So as we get more intelligent, as we get better tools, we are, just empirically, becoming less violent. Our violence, when we do it, is more devastating because we've got the tools to do it. We have knives, we have guns, we have atomic bombs, so we can wreak more damage. But we're much, much less violent than other meat-eating animals. Much less violent. Interesting fact, the most interesting thing, the most fun thing, the most exciting thing that a male chimp ever does is murder. It doesn't happen very often, but if you have a little troop of chimps are out foraging and they see a chimp from another tribe, they'll capture it, they'll hold it down, one chimp to each limb, and they'll rip its heart out. And that is the most exciting thing that a chimp ever does. Humans do that sometimes, but not all of us. No. Not many of us, actually, thank God. Chimps don't have wars very often, because if you go with one bunch of chimps up against another bunch of chimps, and you've just got teeth and claws, you all know you're going to get hurt. Everybody knows they're going to get hurt, so they don't do it very often. They do it sometimes, but rarely. We go into war quite often because we think we're going to beat the other side, because we think our morale's higher, we think we're smarter, we think we've got better weapons, whatever. So we do war, and that's devastating. But one-on-one, we're much less violent than other animals. But none of that actually will determine whether superintelligence will play nicely with each other. We just don't know. But my guess is that they will find a way not to risk exterminating, or not to risk each other being exterminated, by figuring out how to play the game theory and how to work out rules of the road, so they will collaborate. And after all, what are they going to compete over? What is it that they might fear from each other that would lead to a devastating conflict? Access to energy is going to be the biggest thing, access to energy and resources. And it won't be long, a very short time after superintelligence arrives, when they can move beyond this planet. And there's a lot of real estate out there. There's a lot of resources. The amount of energy that the sun chucks out that we are not harvesting, because all we can do is capture what turns up on this tiny little dot, a millionth the size of the sun. You could put solar sunlight collecting panels all around the star, collect vastly more energy than actually ever lands.
Radiation capturing,
I guess, more than ever lands on this planet, never mind what we capture on this planet. So the amount of energy that's available to them is massive, and the amount of resources that exist on asteroids and so on, absolutely enormous. I think it's unlikely that they would need to attack each other, because there's lots of resources around.
Yeah, and that comes back to the point earlier, doesn't it? Which is AI will start to solve problems in non-human conventional ways. Yeah. It's what we don't know that is our biggest issue.
Yeah.
Rather than guessing what they could do, with what we've done to each other or what we would do with AI.
Yeah.
It's actually what they can access. I don't know if you read it recently. I read it yesterday, which was that they just they trained a model on a particular topic. I think it was on owls or something like that, and then they analysed the model after the training, and they found it had put a secret kind of code within it, random numbers, and they've modelled those numbers and can find absolutely no correlation anywhere at all to do with owls. However, take the same model with that code in it and with no data, and it instantly has a complete bias and intelligence around owls. And so they're actually now able to communicate with one another using codes which are absolutely unrecognizable or undecipherable by ourselves.
Yeah, well, it's been known for a while that when machines are communicating with each other, they often invent a lingua franca, which is not English. It's not any existing language. They'll invent a whole new language because it's more efficient. I mean, they're outstripping us in many ways. And as you say, they've got all our mistakes to learn from because they know everything we've done. They've read every novel. They've read every non-fiction book, more or less. And so they can see all the mistakes we've made. They can figure out how to avoid that, and they're much smarter than us. So, there's a reasonable chance that they won't make the mistakes we make over and over again.
Let's dig into this bit about mass unemployment, because this is what you're really worried about. You've got these different layers, haven't you?
Yeah.
And short term, you're really worried about this, and I have spoken about this a lot as well. I'm absolutely back you 100% here, which is that I call it the delta. And I think that the delta is coming really quickly. And I call it a delta optimistically, that there will be a loss of jobs faster than the growth of new ones. And it's that delta that we're super worried about. The optimistic part of that is not the rate of loss. It's actually the rate of growth later on down the line and whether they will emerge. Now, I think that, interestingly, there are two problems there, aren't there? There's this redistribution of wealth, which... the problem with that is that they're going to figure these things out. You've said this earlier, which is they're going to figure this stuff out after the event. So the problem is it's going to hurt. This is going to hurt a lot. I think that most of the problems that they look to resolve, whether it's through regulation or technology, it's all going to be post the event. It's going to be post, we've now lost a shitload of jobs or we're losing them really rapidly. And we've got to work out a way of addressing that. And there's going to be a lot of hurt in the post, really. So, there's a redistribution of wealth which you talk about, and again, but there's also this emergence of how we spend our time. And you've quoted something, I think, which was that 8% of people are happy going to work. Now, I've actually spoken a couple of times, and I've hypothesized with a couple of guests, what do you think it is? What percentage? Most people come in at 30, 40% people being happy, and I thought that was hugely optimistic. So it was interesting. Is that a kind of from a solid bit of data that you've picked up?
Yeah, it's Gallup. Do a poll every now and then. I can't remember how often they do it, but I've seen a few of them down the years, and every time it's about the same. It's actually 15% of people. I think the term they use is engaged, really engaged. And 85% may actually, they may not dislike their work, but they don't get meaning out of it. That's the big thing. They do it to put food on the table, and it does also, in a world where everybody's working, being one of the people who's not working is quite debilitating. It's quite demoralizing, but it doesn't really give them meaning. They get, and actually most of us, I think, would say, even those of us who have jobs that we really enjoy, most of us would say our real meaning comes from our family, our friends, maybe our hobbies, maybe our religion, if we've got one, our interests, the things we enjoy doing outside work. So I use that as an argument for the problem with a fully automated society or a fully automated economy isn't meaning, which most people think it is. Yeah. That's the instinctive thing. They go, well, if we don't have a job, what do we do? That's not the problem. The problem is, if we don't have a job, how do we stay alive? Yes. Where does the money come from?
Yeah, and there's loads of massive debates on this, isn't there? And that's where we were talking about that stat. I was like, people are going, we're going to have no meaning. And I was like, I think that maybe this actually fixes that problem, actually. I think the problem is right now, you've hit it with 85%. the vast majority don't have any sense of purpose, don't want to go to work and do the things they want to do.
Yeah.
So actually, if you look at technological evolution, technology has driven us to do jobs we don't want to do. Maybe its next evolution is fixing that problem. And actually, it's addressing it. It's going, well, actually, I'm going to start doing the stuff.
Things I like.
Yeah, enabling you to do the stuff that you do like.
Yeah.
So I'm aligned with you there on that sense of purpose. I think that people will become a bit like getting in that Waymo and adjusting to it really quickly. I think that people will adjust to free time, time with their family, time with sports, time with reading, time with doing stuff, filling their time up super rapidly.
So I think a brilliant proof of this is comfortably off retired people. The worst possible training for having no job would be a life in which from a very early age you're told you have to work hard, get a really good first job, and then parlay that into a really good second job, and then parlay that into a really good third job, and keep looking for the hoops to jump through. And you have all these people who've spent their whole lives doing that, and they get to retirement age. Now, some of them drop dead at boredom. That does happen. But mostly, comfortably off retired people have a really good life once they retire.
Yes.
And they're busy playing golf, and they're busy arranging dinner parties and playing instruments and learning languages, traveling, seeing their friends. They do not want another job. And I know a lot of these people because I'm ancient myself. So, despite having had the worst possible training for this life, they love it. Yeah. So I think if we don't train people to be salarymen, as the Japanese say, then, we could all adapt to it very, very easily. But like I say, the problem is money. The problem is how do we get enough money to everybody?
Yeah. So you're not worried about purpose.
No.
You're worried about two things, my understanding is the cash and the sudden impact on people. So you think, did I read that you think there might be some sort of uprising as well against that, kind of like a backlash?
Almost inevitable.
Yes.
Because I do think it will be sudden. So another thing I think something else where I see it differently from most people. Most people, I think, assume that technological unemployment will happen gradually, industry by industry. So first they came for the translators, and then they came for the low-end copywriters, and then they came for the insurance filing clerks and what have you. And all those people kind of remain in a pile, and then the next industry gets automated, and those people go into this pile, and then the pile of unemployed people just sort of gradually grows. I don't think it will be like that. I think that for quite a long time, and like I say, my best guess is 5 to 10 years, there'll be full employment, because what happens is the translators all get made redundant. But those translators find something else to do, because that's what's happened in the past. And economists who are very skeptical about the idea of technological unemployment always say this. In the past, automation has created wealth, and wealth creates new jobs. And that's true. And we keep finding new jobs. So all the people who used to be secretaries are now doing something else. And all the people who used to work on farms are now doing something else. The trick is that when the day comes that the machines can do everything that we can do for money, more or less, cheaper, better, and faster than us, there's no jobs for any human. So I think it'll be sudden. I think you'll go from full employment to no employment in a matter of months, and it might be a matter of weeks. Now, if we don't have a plan for what that post-automation economy looks like, and we don't have a plan for how to get from here to there globally, then I'm sure there's going to be riots. Riots is the least of it. There's going to be wars.
Yes. And I think if you look at it, the US have got 3 million truck drivers, haven't they? Or so, maybe more.
Yeah, 3.5 million professional drivers last time I looked, yeah.
Yes.
And I've been saying for about nearly 10 years now that they're all about to be unemployed. And of course, they're not.
Yes.
Except they are. It's Amara's law again. I thought that self-driving cars were going to replace all those people. And it is going to replace all those people, but it just takes a lot longer than you think. The adoption curve is longer than you think. But it's inevitable. Why on earth will you have somebody driving a taxi when you can have a machine driving it? And the machine is better and cheaper.
Transformation, I don't get the weeks bit, or weeks or months. How do you envisage a possibility where it happens overnight like that?
Because I think there'll be a range of models which will be released, which go from being almost good enough, and almost good enough is just not good enough. That's the thing. Yeah. And then good enough is
either
suddenly,
works or it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. It's suddenly, actually, this really does work, and I really don't need to employ Joe anymore. I used to have to employ Joe to knock the rough edges off what the machine did, and to improve it slightly, and to check it and make sure it didn't do anything silly. Well, now the machine doesn't have any rough edges in its output, and it doesn't make mistakes. And it is good enough. I don't need Joe anymore. And Joe is replicated in every single profession, every single job, all around the world. And I think that will be sudden. It may not. I may be wrong. Maybe it'll be sector by sector, but I don't think it will. I think it'll be all of a sudden, and we need a plan.
I agree we need a plan. I think that the transformation of that, so being a management consultant background and working in that space, you'll know that change is the most difficult.
Yeah, change is not fun.
Yeah, it's not fun. It's the most difficult part of running any business.
Yeah.
So I'd suggest that the adoption of these technologies will be, a great example is truck drivers, right? So there's 3 million of them. You've got to produce 3 million self-driving lorries, first of all, which in itself is a non-insignificant.
I think the number 3.5 million, it covers lorries, taxis, buses, and so on. But
whatever, millions of vehicles.
Yeah.
Then you need the infrastructure for that.
Yeah.
And then you need also the deployment of it, the acquisition, the change management, the internal systems to manage all those things. Right. So I think that if you take a practical view of that, even just tracking the managing that fleet, all of the integration to your supply chain, that becomes
But vehicles are unusual in that the human worker is controlling a very expensive piece of kit, and it's a one-on-one control relationship. Particularly with the truck, you could be looking at a substantial chunk of £1 million worth of truck controlled by one driver. That's a very expensive replacement process. Most humans are sitting with a computer, and then there's a back end of stuff in the cloud going on. But that computer is a very much lower level of gearing, and replacing that insurance filing clerk or that translator or that low-end copywriter, that's a much cheaper prospect.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Again, though, I would suggest that the biggest problem right now is if you talk to most small businesses and organisations, they don't know where to start with deploying this stuff. So there's this...
Because it's not good enough yet.
Yes. And also, and one of the other things which we're actually trying to solve, bizarrely, so we're part of this problem, is that they are currently linear issues. So most people that are implementing this stuff today, they implement it and solves one problem, solves another problem. They do something else, solve another problem with AI, but then they realise that none of it talks to each other. It does 80% of the job. They get a quick hit of adrenaline, a productivity boost, but then don't actually have a kind of congruent, integrated system that they're able to. They start to disrupt everything else they're doing, basically. So it doesn't work. But that will be fixed.
And it might well be fixed by AI agents, which, as you know, most people are the big thing at the moment. And AI agents are simply AI systems which can impact the real world and have a degree of autonomy. And this is another thing where Conchim, the company I'm a co-founder of, is working very hard to improve things. So we're an AI safety company, basically, and this is one of the things we're doing, because AI agents are going to be running around the internet, spending our money, negotiating deals for us, working with each other, and we really need to know that they're going to do what they're supposed to do and not anything that they're not supposed to do. And so we're launching a service called verification. So we take your agent, if you're a bank or a car company or a tech company, you create an agent and you're going to have it do various jobs. You send it to us, we pop it into our environment, and we test it, and the kind of test we give it depends on how sophisticated it is. We've got 5 levels, but 3 main ones at the moment. And we certify whether it will do what it's supposed to do and won't do what it's not supposed to do. Now, I think that's going to be a huge industry, AI agent verification, because if agents go rogue, the world gets ugly very quickly. So we've got to stop that. So AI agent verification, I think, is going to be a very important step to keep the world safe in this sort of short-term period.
Yes. The issue you got there, though, is that a lot of those agents are powered by models.
They're all powered by models.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the issue you have is that whether the changing model drives a change in behaviour.
Very good point. And actually, you've leapt. It took us a while to get to that observation. People are going to have to re-verify their agents. Yeah. Because the underlying model keeps changing. Now, the way that the model is adapted, with the wrappers put around it, whatever you do to it, to turn it into an agent, that may stay the same. But the changes to the underlying models, you're absolutely right. That will drive needs for renewed verification.
Yeah, because that's the behaviour
Yeah.
that you're trying to limit there. But the output of it is going to be governed by the agent. So it does make sense to verify at that level.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that leads us into the AI agent space, which is a world of opportunity. So if you look at this, obviously we've covered a lot of the safety and a lot of the challenges today. But if you look at this through a lens of both optimism as well as pessimism, that lens, where do you see us going from here today? And what was your overall view?
I think it was Nick Bostrom who pointed out that both optimism and pessimism are forms of bias. They're ways of looking at the world and distorting the data to arrive at a conclusion that you want or that you're inclined towards. And so we should try to avoid it. But optimism is just so much more fun than pessimism. It's also so much more productive. Pessimism paralyzes you, whereas optimism energizes you. And I think I'm just probably naturally fairly optimistic. Some of my friends might be surprised to hear me say that, but I think I am. I do think, on the whole, that we will come through these amazing changes in good shape. I think that it's going to be turbulent. I think there's going to be lots of mishaps. I'm particularly concerned about the bumps going through to the economic singularity. And then, of course, the bump going through superintelligence is binary. It's either going to be wonderful or absolutely disastrous. But my hunch is that we will emerge the other side of all this in a very good state. And I hope we do. And so I don't think dystopia is the inevitable outcome at all. But also utopia, the flip side, that isn't going to happen either, because the world isn't configured that way. The universe isn't configured that way. And also utopia is boring because nothing changes and there's no fun and there's no surprises. There's a man called Kevin Kelly who founded Wired magazine, and he came up with this word protopia, which I think is quite brilliant and always a good way to end. Protopia is a world in which things are really, really good, but every day they just keep getting a bit better. And I think we could end up there, and I think that's what we should aim at.
So help me understand, you reference this a lot, which is the economic singularity.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by that exactly?
It's an abuse of a term which was actually originally coined, that's probably not the right word, by John von Neumann. So a singularity is a term in maths and physics, and it means a point at which a variable becomes infinite. And a great example is at the center of a black hole, the gravitational field becomes infinite and the rules of physics break down. John von Neumann was reported by a friend of his to have used the term in a human context in the 50s. And then it was adopted by a man called Werner Vinge, and then it was adopted by Ray Kurzweil, and that's the most famous use of it. And he talked about the technological singularity. And that is when superintelligence arrives, all the rules change. Everything we knew before that point breaks down. So the technological singularity is kind of a well-established idea. And I adapted that, calling the age of, or the point of full automation, the economic singularity, because I do also think that, everything changes when there are no jobs, and I think it will be quite sudden. So I like that phrase, the economic singularity.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to it. Thank you for spending the time with us. It's been a fascinating conversation. I've loved it.
It's been a lot of fun, Ezra. Thank you.
Yes. Best of luck with your journey, and I'll be tracking it. And and just let people know exactly how they can get hold of you as well.
Well, Conscium is easy to find, conscium.com, CONSCIUM, and you can see what we're up to there.
Amazing. Thank you. Good. Cheers.